Today's program is Doc Martin and Craig White. Craig is Bob White's son, and they're going to be talking about music in Springfield and including the Jubilee and whatever. And so, at this time, I'll turn it over to them.
I'll start off here. I'll bring Doc up in just a minute, but I just wanted to say a few words about those early days in Springfield. As a kid growing up in Springfield, it was kind of interesting. I went to Glendale High School, and a lot of my friends are here from high school. Steve Sneed, Larry Lipscomb, Linda, Aaron, yeah, and we all went to high school at Glendale. My sister went to Glendale, and so anyway, back in those days, Pat Jackson back there, my good buddy, went to Glendale. We grew up not really. I mean, it was funny at that time in the Jubilee because a lot of my friends' parents, some of them thought it was really cool. Some of them didn't care too much for country music, thought it was kind of weird at that time, and my friends didn't, and I didn't really, and myself included, didn't really know the difference. You know, we just knew that there was stuff going on around us, but as most of them got into either professional life in Springfield or in the music, they got an appreciation for the Jubilee, and it really is a historic landmark, and it goes back even further to the early days of K-WTO radio, and I'll let Doc get into all that stuff in a little bit. But I wanted my sister to come up here with me for a moment, and or at least stand up. Anyway, I want to introduce my sister, and Carol was one of the promenaders. Wagon wheelers on the Jubilee, the square dance, I'm sorry. And in the early days, and L.D. Keller was and then Gary Ellison took this collar after L.D. Keller. And so anyway, that's, you know, my history is pretty brief, so I have had some near brushes with fame. But I've had a lot of success. I've never played with anybody really major, you know, and just a few pickup gigs here and there, but I've played with some wonderful folks. Pat Jackson for one, J.R. Rollins, Bud Lane, Tim Burrows, Chris Albert, who I love playing Texan Roadies, that's a fun gig, Tom, and Rob Werby, it goes way back. He's got a lot of history in this town, and so anyway, I stayed in Springfield, and then I went to Branson, and I got a job in the Shepherd of the Hills play. And so I couldn't decide if I wanted to be an actor, if I wanted to be a musician, or what I wanted to be. Then I gave it all up and went to plumbing school at the advice of some of the people that played and acted with me. So anyway, I went through an apprentice program doing that, and I tried every way in the world to stay out of the entertainment business, and mostly because I had just seen the effect it had had on some of my dad's friends, not all of them, but some of his friends throughout the years just really couldn't cope with it, and it devastated their lives. So it was kind of one of those things where I wasn't sure I really wanted to do it, but I just eventually gravitated towards playing after a couple of short-lived acting stints. But I really enjoy playing music. I had a pretty good career in Branson. I stayed there and played in 15 or 20, maybe 30 different shows over a 15-year period because they change up so much. I played the last 2 years with CJ and Patsy Cline Remembered, and it was a lot of fun. Really a lot of good brush work just on drums, and I kind of got back to the complete basics of playing drums. My dad bought me a set of brushes and told me if I learned how to use those, like he'd give me some sticks. So that's kind of how that started. Him being a bass player, he was very sensitive to obnoxious drummers. Not that he was around many of them, but drums can be the most obnoxious instrument in the world if they're not played right. So anyway, that led to kind of the Branson era for me, which I spent most of my career down there in Branson. And at one point, I even went into the Chamber of Commerce, and I was Chamber of Commerce manager in 1980 for Branson. And it was kind of a confrontational thing. They wanted me to, because of my contacts, to, hey, let's get Nashville or New York or LA to come in, and support us. And I thought, my reaction was, why? You know, we've got our own thing here, you know. Muscle Shoals, Alabama did their own thing. Detroit did their own thing. Motown. Everybody did their own thing. Why are we wanting these other places to play ball with us? You know, let's just create our own ball game. And they just could not understand that. And so that was short-lived as well, as have been most of my careers or career choices. They have been, and of my own volition. So, but anyway, I'm back in Springfield and been on the road. Worked for Johnny Morris, which was a great gig for about 10 years. My wife Laura and I, we had a pretty good stint with Johnny for a while. So anyway, we're back in the Ozarks, and that's probably about enough about me. I want to introduce this next fellow, who it was. I got to tell the story, and Linda, you'll appreciate this. I got a phone call one day from Nancy Henderson. It was Nancy Jersak in high school, and Nancy calls, and that may be her. No. Anyway, Nancy calls on the phone. And she says, Craig, she says, there's a guy that I've called down here, and he's interested in seeing the Quebe sisters, who are great, bluegrass, right? Gospel blue, or no?
Western Swing.
Western Swing, I'm sorry. Okay, correct me. Western Swing. I've never heard them, but I plan on Googling them. Anyway, so the Quebe sisters, and she said, and he says he was on the Jubilee. I said, well, what's his name? She said, Doc Martin. I go, no. I mean, Doc. I mean, that's, Nancy. No, he's not still around. She said, well, he says he's played steel on Jubilee. I said, well, can I have his phone number? And I'll just find out. So she gave me his number. So I called Doc, and I hadn't seen you since I was little. And he answers the phone. He goes, "Is Doc?" I said, "Doc Martin, that used to be with the Jubilee?" "Yeah, that's right." And I'm talking to this guy. Sounds like he's 45, 50 years old. The guy's got a ton of energy. And so we reconnected after all these years, and it was just a wonderful thing. I was just so excited about it. He came down and brought my sister and I a bunch of posters and things, which we have some pictures and things to pass around. But I'm gonna get him up here now and continue on and get into the meat of some early Springfield music. Doc Martin.
When you said that ton of energy, it's going to take more than a ton to get me up there. I'll pull when you do it. Okay, thank you, Craig.
He sits right there.
This is the main chair. I don't need the main chair.
You sit the main chair. You're the main guy.
Okay. You mean this, I'm supposed to start talking?
No, we're not this side.
Okay.
Doc is really hoping that there'll be a lot of questions about the early Jubilee, and I just wanted to start out. I was going to ask you to just kind of go over your earliest remembrances of the stories that I like, and the number one story is your background and how you got into playing steel guitar in the first place.
Okay. We're going to start off here. This is my wife, Dee, sitting down here. Now, I'm supposed to keep my eyes on her, because she says if you get to talking too much, if I do this, quit. So, am I all right now? Okay. And Craig's daddy, Bob White, one of my very best friends, went around here in the Jubilee and K-WTO. And my music started really in grade school, back at York Grade School in West Springfield, where I attended the grade school. And one Christmas, maybe maybe the fourth grade, while we drew names, that's back when you could buy presents for 10 cents, Well, the kid that drew my name gave me a 10-cent harmonica. I thought, what in the world is this for? Because I wanted something with wheels on it where I go, brrr. So I put it in the bib of my overalls. And at recess, when we went out, I happened to think, hey, I reached up there and got that. And it was just by the grace of God that it was turned the right way. So when I pulled it out and I started blowing it, the low notes were on the left side where they're supposed to be. And I just started playing it. I thought, well, maybe this is not too bad. Well, that's the way my music career started. And then a short time later, I picked up guitar, learned to play it. Then when I done that, that's all I could think about. School meant nothing, anything. Had absolutely made no mark in my life whatsoever, but music, that's all I wanted to do. But there's a radio station that came to Springfield before K-WTO, it was KGBX. I don't know if your dad ever worked at KGBX or not.
I don't know if he did.
But some of their early ones, there's a picture here that we're going to pass around it somewhere, but one of there's a father and son tune named Jimmy DeNoon, and his dad was on KGBX. Well, later on in my music career, I got to do some work with Jimmy DeNoon, and he's in one of these pictures. But but my ambition was to go to K-WTO, because every entertainer at K-WTO was my hero. And I knew if I could make it to K-WTO, I had reached the very top of the music around this area. But they wouldn't give me a job. They never told me why, but you know, when I learned to play steel guitar, then that's what I wanted to do. And they wouldn't tell me why they wouldn't give me a job. It was several years before I found out. But then I teamed up with a little group. We went to Denver, Colorado, worked out there. And to kind of get more towards the end of that, the guy that I worked for, a guy named Shorty Thompson, he had worked at K-WTO many years ago. And he had a big band out there. He also had a booking office. So he booked our little group out there. Then a few years later, Shorty had made some contact with some people in Hollywood to come out and make a picture. So, and your dad had joined Shorty's group. Speedy Hallworth had joined for Shorty's group, but he came back. Another entertainer named Zed Tennis, played fiddle, joined us. And then we made this picture with the El Dorado Pass with the Durango Kid, Charles Sterrett. Then when we came back to Springfield then, I thought, okay, I've got credentials now, so I can go to work at K-WTO. Nope, they didn't need a steel player. This guy's daddy, Bob White, he went to the program director, which was Lou Black, says, we need a steel player here. We don't have one. He said, Doc Martin's working right down the street here, so why don't you give him a job? Says, oh, we've got all the drunks we need here. So, I mean, these people had worked up a reputation. Yeah. And so Bob says, well, he said, I've been working with Doc for the last 6 months. Said, I've never seen him take a drink, and he said he has never had one. And he said, I believe him. Lou Black said, oh, said, I've seen Doc so drunk he couldn't even cross the street. But thank goodness Bob White stayed on Lou Black, and finally he said, well, tell him to come up and talk to me. So I went up and talked to him, and he laid down all the rules and gave me the job. And it was just, I was fortunate to get on one program that he emceed on K-WTO in the afternoon. And after about 2 weeks, he apologized on the air, which I appreciate that. He said, if I'd known Doc Martin the way I know him now, said he'd have been here a long time ago. So that's where my career started at K-WTO, and I got to play with some great talent there. And then they had some awful good promoters that started bringing outsiders in. Now there's a picture, one of those is a studio picture at KY3. KY3 is the one that started the Ozark Jubilee. It didn't start with the promoters who ended it up. It started in their studios on their television station. And it must have been a pretty good success. Then K-WTO, some of the promoters there got a hold of it, and then brought in Red Foley from Nashville, and Red Foley came in with his own band because he didn't know the musicians around Springfield, so he brought his own band in. But every member in Red Foley's band had recorded under their own name, so they were all stars. Now it's hard to make a band with sidemen when they're all stars. So friction started, and they started leaving one at a time. So we ended up with Slim Wilson's band doing the majority of the TV shows or the Jubilee shows with Red Foley. And that's when my career really ended. But in the meantime, after I'd been at K-WTO a short time, the Hayden family, if some of you remember the Hayden family, it's Junior Hayden sitting right with the call. Junior's had a problem. That's the reason he wears a cap. He don't want anyone to see his hair, what's left of it. Yeah. But they had a family, great family. I just fell in love with the harmony that when they were singing, so they let me start working with them. And we left here, well, I guess the first time we even left Springfield to make an appearance anywhere, some of you, the old timers, remember Don McNeil and the Breakfast Club. Well, Don used to come down here fishing every year. Junior's dad, he acted as Don McNeil's guide, fishing guide, and take him. When Don McNeil's Breakfast Club then they went on television. Why, they got in touch with Junior's dad, Carl Sr., to come up and do an appearance in Chicago on TV. And I got to go up there with them. Well, at that appearance, there was a gentleman that they had worked with in Shenandoah, Iowa, that started a business in Shenandoah and then moved on to Omaha. And he happened to watch Don McNeil's show that night. And so he got in touch with Carl Hayden, says, hey, said, how about coming to Omaha and doing some television for me? So we went to Omaha for a year and worked for Rap. Yeah, okay. And then, I don't know, our show kind of played out, but I came back to K-WTO, and shortly after that, when the Jubilee started. And that was one of the, really, you can get some of the historians, and they'll tell you that the Jubilee was probably the greatest thing that ever came into Springfield. And the TV show carried a #1 rating for 2 years. And some time ago, I looked up on the computer and about the Jubilee, and they listed over 100 guests that we'd had on that show. And it wasn't all just singers or musicians. It was, I mean, they covered the whole field. And I got to thinking about that. We had, us people in the band we had to satisfy every one of them. And I got to thinking it was really just the local people in the band that really done an outstanding job. So when the Jubilee started to go off the air, well then I started thinking, I haven't done anything but music. I don't even know if I can work or not. But I had a contact that with Terry Moss when we were up in Omaha with doing television there. He was producer of our show, and he had a business, so I got in touch with him. Well, really, I called Junior. I said, you tell Terry that if he needs a good man, I'm going to be available in 2 weeks. So anyway, I went to Omaha, and that's when I dropped playing music regularly. And then I worked with a few groups up there on weekends. Now, I've got to tell you, this story's not complete unless I tell you the whole end of it. So I started my own little band up there on weekends, and a lady that I was working with at another place invited us to go to a revival at her church. So I come home and told my wife Dee on a Monday. She said, well, let's go. So we went on Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday, and then I had my dance band I had to work with the rest of the weekend. But after about 2 or 3 weeks, the Lord started talking to me. And then I told Dee, I said, I'm going to have to give up my band. Because I said, if I believe that I am a Christian and I go into some of these places, I'm taking Jesus in there with me. And I said, I'm not going in there for his glory, I'm going in for mine. And so if you'd have told me 2 weeks earlier, oh, you'll give that music up, because I'd played all my life. And I thought, no, you're out of your mind. I can't give it up. But the Lord took the desire to play away from me. Now I still listen. I love music because I was raised with it, and I love it, and I love its place. But the Lord took the desire away from me. He opened up other talents that I didn't even know I had. At the place where I was working was doing, at that time, was high-speed tape duplicating. We were going into cassettes, and first the old 8-track cartridge. Then I started designing and building automated packaging equipment. And I built one of the very first complete CD packaging machines that was in the United States. And I love the building. I tell people I never worked a day in my life because I never had a job I didn't like. And if you like what you're doing, it's not work. You know, it's a privilege to go. I worked until I was 76 years old before I even retired. And I might still be working for them, but they shut down and moved to Nashville. But that's my music career.
Well, I want you to tell them about you didn't. That wasn't the first thing you ever built.
No, I did. When Red Foley came to Springfield, he brought a steel player with him, a guy named Bud Isaacs, and he introduced the pedal sound to the steel guitar. He introduced that in Nashville. And to get one of these guitars, it was a Bigsby guy in California made them. Well, it took 2 years to get one, and they were a little expensive. Well, Bud Isaacs was a character. But anyway, he said one time he was going to be gone a week, and I asked him if I could borrow his steel guitar. He said, yeah. Now, you got to appreciate this instrument. You know, people talk about they've got something, oh, that's the Cadillac of that. Well, this Bigsby steel's not the Cadillac, the Bigsby. It was the Rolls Royce of the guitars. So I told Bud, I said, I better tell you what I'm going to do with it. I said, I'm going to completely disassemble your guitar because there's several cast aluminum parts on there. I said, I'm going to use all your cast aluminum parts and take them over here to a foundry and have me a set made and make me a Bigsby guitar. I said, okay. So that's how I came up with that. Then, but me and this guy's daddy, Bob White, we started getting together on making different things. We ended up with a patent on the tremolo tailpiece for a guitar, but then also started putting pedals on the steel guitars around here that couldn't afford to buy a Bigsby, but they wanted pedals, so we started putting pedals on steel guitars. And there's a young fella at that time, guy named Roger Blevins, and if any of you ever been at Branson to the Ball Knobber show, he's not there because he's retired from there, but he's a young guy that he worked with the Ball Knobbers for 30-some years. And he was one of the first guys that I put pedals on his steel guitar for, but immediately we had a guest come into the Jubilee from Virginia. And at that night, he went down to a place where Roger was playing, and he hadn't heard this pedal sound before. So he immediately gave Roger a job. So Roger left and went to Virginia. Well, they done an awful lot of personal appearances over on the eastern side of the United States. But I could tell everywhere they went, because if there's a steel player there and saw them pedals, I heard from him the next day. He says, can I send my steel to you and put pedals? So we done that for quite a while too. And I guess that started my building career, which ended up with machines. Okay, that's my career.
I got to just say that it's been a true pleasure getting back to knowing this guy again. And although I don't even really remember you from when I was young, but Carol remembers a lot more than I do. But and just some of the days of spending time with around Red Foley and Chet Atkins. I used to travel with my dad to Nashville quite often, and we'd go.
Let me interrupt you. When you mentioned Chet Atkins, Chet was playing in the same band I was playing with in Denver when he cut his first record. And his brother was working at WLS in Chicago, set up the recording for him to come to Chicago and cut a record. But when he came back to Denver, the guy we was working for in the band, he fired him because he wouldn't use us to back him. And that's when Chet went to Nashville. So we go back a long ways to them guys.
Yeah.
And people that really don't realize how many stars that really came through Springfield.
I was hoping maybe you might have a couple stories about Patsy Cline, actually. I had the privilege of doing the Ozark Jubilee reunion back in '99 with Speedy and Marvin Rainwater, Leroy Van Dyke, I mean, a whole bunch of greats. But I was curious if you had any stories about Patsy.
Well, I don't have any stories about Patsy. I've heard history about Patsy, but I loved her voice. I loved her singing. Easy to work with, very easy to work with. But if we go back to K-WTO, Homer and Jethro was here. The Carter family was here. And another one of the great guitar players that come along really about the time Chet did, Les Paul. But when he was at Springfield, he didn't go by the name of Les Paul. He was Rhubarb Red. He played harmonica and banjo. And but some of the great country entertainers passed through and worked at Springfield.
Yeah, I was going to say Johnny Gimbel.
Johnny.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Johnny Gimbel never was a front man to come to the front, but I got acquainted with Johnny Gimbel. He come up here to visit a fiddle player that we had out of Texas, and me and Johnny, I immediately just kind of latched up. He was here one day, and that one day, he played on a radio show with us. We recorded another show. We went down to Forsyth fishing and swimming. We come back and had a jam session at my home before he left to go back home in one day. But from then on, though, Johnny and me stayed real close. And at that time, Johnny was just playing part-time in Texas. He was a barber. Then he went to Alaska to work on the Alaska pipeline. Well, he didn't work on a pipeline, but he opened up a barber shop in a military base there, and that's what he was doing in Alaska. Then when the Jubilee started, or after it had started just a little bit, we needed, after the Ozark Jubilee folded, they started another called 5-Star Jubilee. And Red Foley wasn't even on that one. But they wanted to add another fiddle player to the band, and I'd already moved to Omaha, or in that area. And when I was down here, they asked him, I said, well, have you got in touch with the fiddle player yet? He said, no, we're thinking about going over to Leon McCullough's band in Tulsa to get a fiddle player. And I said, well, hold on just a minute. Let me get in touch with the guy. So I had Johnny Gimbel's dad's phone number in Texas, so I called him. He said, well, you want to talk to Johnny? He's here. Says he just come back from Alaska. So I said, Johnny, get your instruments together and come to Springfield. They want you for an audition. So he got his fiddle and his mandolin and came to Springfield. Naturally, when you hear Johnny, if there's an opening, you're going to hire him. And that's how come Johnny Gimbel in Springfield, and of course, he become one of the greatest studio fiddle players in Nashville. Everybody wanted him. Yeah.
We used to, my dad would take me down to Nashville and we would go to get hold of Johnny and Chet, but we'd go, Johnny I especially enjoyed going with him to maybe 5 or 6 sessions a day.
Yeah.
And he'd play in master sessions. And this, I mean, the ultimate studio musician, and it was just amazing. The guys he played with and his performance, it was usually, he was always first take on everything. I wanted to mention something again about, you mentioned Hank, Shorty Thompson earlier. And for those of you who don't know, Shorty Thompson was Wayne Carson's dad.
Yeah.
And so that was, they weren't, I don't know if they were from Springfield or not.
Well, I don't, of course, when I worked with Shorty, Wayne was, he's just a little guy.
Yeah.
I really didn't know him that well. But Shorty worked here for a while with Slim Wilson, and they worked together for some time on the radio station, KGBX and KWTO, with Slim and Shorty, just a duet. And how come him to go west, I don't know, never did hear the story. But, okay, I guess that's mine. Yeah, okay.
And their real last name was Head.
Yeah, Head. Yeah.
Head.
Shorty, yeah.
Well, Shorty had a brother, his name was Charles. Well, the nickname for Charles is Chuck. And someone called my house one day and wanted to know if Chuck Head was there. I said, Jughead? I don't know anyone named Jughead.
You mentioned Lou Black earlier.
Lou Black?
Lou Black?
He was program director at Springfield. He came in with a group from Kansas City as a musicians group. And but he stayed on there and worked a little bit of staff, and then they made program director out of it.
And the building, KSMU's original building, southwest corner of Grand and National, that's where he lived. That was his home.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some memory.
Yeah.
Are you any kin to Ike Martin?
Ike Martin? No.
He had the
no.
music store here.
He had the music store here. No, and as far as Ike Martin, I don't know. I never even met him, but he had a son that I did meet one time. Yeah.
I was also wanting to know, how much hands-on did Cy Simon or Ralph Foster have with the Jubilee? Any at all, besides just being a part of getting it going?
I didn't hear the first part of your question.
You just want to know about Cy Simon and Ralph Foster, what their involvement was with the...
Well,
Did they
Ralph
have hands-on?
Foster, who owned KWTO, Ralph Foster came from St. Joe, Missouri. He owned a tire shop in St. Joe. And there was a state radio station there in the early years of radio back in the 30s. And now whether Ralph was involved with that radio station at the time or not, but he bought it and moved it to Springfield. And it became KGBX in the Chamber of Commerce building in Springfield. And then, of course, it was a big hit. But where it was up on the frequency of the radio dial, it didn't have the reach. And then this other frequency come available down on the low end. So Ralph made application for that and bought that and called it KWTO, Keep Watching the Ozark. So he owned them both for a while. And then the FCC made a ruling that you couldn't own but one radio station in one city. So then he sold KGBX to the newspaper. And they both still operated when they was on St. Louis Street across from the Shrine Mosque. KGBX and KWTO both were in the same building there for years. Then KWTO moved out on Glenstone.
Were they instrumental in Jubilee as well? That's also Tim's question.
I wanted to know if they had hands-on the Jubilee, or they just...
Were they hands-on
promoters or managers?
with the Jubilee?
Well, they had Cy Simon that worked at the radio station, at that time more of public relations. But Cy Simon also was a fantastic salesman. And he could see he was good at promoting things, so it's little small things, and then, of course, there's a lot of intern stuff there that I don't know what went on, but of course, Si Simon, and then Ralph Foster also brought in a nephew of his,
John Mahaffey.
yeah, Mahaffey, John Mahaffey, So, and, so it became really the Foster family, but Si Simon wasn't any relation to Ralph Foster at all. Yes.
Relationship between international jazz bass player Charlie Hayden and the Hayden family?
Yes,
So-
yes.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah, that's it.
It's my brother.
His brother. He was classified as the top jazz bassist in the world. Yeah, Charlie Hayden. Well, when I worked with the Hayden family, he didn't play bass. He played a little bongo drum. But he had a brother, Jimmy Hayden, world of talent. The Haydens, they weren't only country. They could take a modern song with 4-part harmony, and Jimmy, he could listen to it, and he could cut out everything but the part he wanted to hear. And he'd teach that part to one of the kids, and it was great. Jimmy ended up playing, I think, with a house band in Reno. And I don't know where, Charlie went to California, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he passed away, about 2 years ago?
Yeah, he played with Don Cherry and a lot of great, all the greats.
Oh, did he?
Yeah,
Of course, I lost.
Charlie Parker.
yeah. Tom?
Doc, when you took that steel apart, got the parts and made your own steel,
Yeah.
you still have that guitar?
My son Mickey over here has it. He don't play it, but you don't touch it.
It's a piece of history that really
Yeah.
should be preserved, and
Well-
obviously it is preserved.
Well, what do you want to give for?
I'm trying to get it for years, I prayed to leave it in.
He said you can take a picture of it and see it.
I'd love to see the picture.
There's a picture of it on one of these there.
Yeah, yeah.
Tom is one of the foremost guitar.
That's not it. That's not it. Just
No.
That's a Fender
There
there.
should be a picture.
Yeah.
Is it the one, what was the name that was on the front of that steel?
Bigsby. Well, on mine it says Ullyan, U-L-Y-A-N.
What did
Well, that's my name.
That's his real name. You-
Doc is a nickname, and you can, with a name like Ullyan, you gotta have a nickname. Yeah, that's it right there. That's the
That's
one.
why I couldn't
Now there's
figure
a-
out that name.
There's a story goes with that guitar that I copied it off of. I looked on the computer here, some time ago, and they've got a form on there, the steel guitar form, and you get to read about all the old players and what's for sale. Well, the steel that I took apart and used all the things just to make mine sold for $60,000. And then I read on down there, and someone had put another note in there, said he sold it too cheap, you could have got $80,000 out of it.
Probably could now.
Yeah, and that's
This
a
photo-
copy of it.
This photo shows a guitar player who's got one of the Marrite tremolos on it. that you guys
Yeah,
made over
well,
there.
that's, the Marrite was the name of me and Bob White gave our company. M-A-R for Martin and I-T-E for White, yeah, Marrite.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. Oh, there's Marrite. There's, this yours? Did you steal this off of someone? Oh, wow. There's that man, Bob White has a patent on this right here. Yeah, there's a handle goes on here, the strings.
Here's the handle right here.
Yeah, okay. Whoa. You've got a precious item there.
Yeah, that is awesome.
But I don't even have one. Yeah. You want to sell it?
So that $29.95.
Oh, absolutely.
Bob, is that the same address, 1031?
Yes, Barnes.
Barnes? Just pass that around. Whose house was that?
That was Doc's house.
Barnes?
What?
Yeah, on Barnes, that's where he lived.
That's where Doc lived. Okay.
Yeah, I lived on Barnes
The wife,
Avenue.
it was-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell them how you, when you took that guitar apart, you took those cast pieces down to have them cast. You had one cast, I think, to see if it was gonna work, and, after you cast it, the dimensions were wrong. But you had to make all them cast parts out of wood.
Well, no, I did this on this thing here he brought up on that
Yeah,
tailpiece,
on this,
yes,
yeah.
yes, I made that out of wood, and then, but Bob, he knew a guy, a machinist down at Galloway, that he made the final one on that we got the patent on, but this guy, now Bigsby owns a patent on that, really originally, and we thought no one could do it, but Bigsby had the design patent. We got the mechanical patent, because we made it enough different. Bigsby, the bars that bring that back to pitch are spring steel bars. Bigsby just used a coil spring under that set on the guitar that you push the handle down and the coil spring will bring it back to pitch. But it's a different approach on it. But money don't mean that much to me. To spend time with my family that's time you cannot put a price on. And we done enough of this to get our money back, and then just let it drop. That's as far as it went. But when we had it, wanted to sell, the people saw it, wanted it, but that's the way it went.
Well, you made amplifiers too.
Yeah. Okay.
I had a question about these. This looks like the same tailpiece that was on Stratosphere guitars. Do you have anything to do with Stratosphere and the Devers?
No.
You have a big picture of it, don't you, the patent and...
Yeah, I got a picture. Here's the patent on that right there. Now, Bob White, he didn't have the mechanic ability that I had, but he was a good leg man. And he never saw a stranger, and he'd talk to anyone, and he's pretty good salesman.
Question.
Yes.
There's another steel player that's kind of a local guy, and I wonder if you fixed him up or anything. That's Leon Roush.
Leon Roush. He's in Dallas, Texas right now.
Yeah.
I had met Leon, but we never really got together that much. But Leon, he ended up, with Bob Wills and became his #1 singer. And but Leon, right now, here some time ago, I called him, and he's got some health problems now.
Oh, does he?
And he's getting up there in age. He's in his probably mid to late 80s now, yeah. But he sang good up until he's 80 years old.
He was on TV with Sleep at the Wheel on Channel 21. But
Yeah.
anyway, and he's still kicking a little bit, but he's
Yeah.
he's not. But he was playing the.
Yeah.
Tell her about Leon's sign down.
Oh, Leon Rouse. He's originally from Billings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the family fathers got together down there, and they called Leon, wanted to know they're going to put a new sign out there coming into Billings, want to know if they could put his name on it, like the home of Leon Rouse. He said, sure. Well, they made the sign, sent Leon the bill. When Leon finally come down to Billings to see the sign, they spelled his name wrong. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I just want to say one more thing. There's we have a book here. This is Rita Spears Stewart, authored this book, and my sister and I had the opportunity and pleasure to work with her on that. And Pat and I did a lot of interviews with Porter and gosh, all kinds of artists from this that we still have the footage that we're desperately want to do something with it someday. We surely will before we die. I don't know for sure, but I've got a whole trunk of these if anybody's interested in it.
You mentioned the name Porter Wagner. Of course, everyone knows that Porter Wagner really started his career at K-WTO. Well, I had the pleasure of being his steel man while he was here. And of course, me and Porter, I love Western swing. Porter was more to the country, leaning just a little bit to bluegrass. And there's things that we didn't disagree on, but we never had an argument about it. But then Porter turned out to be what I really call a friend. When me and Bob White was working on this tailpiece to get a patent for it, we needed $500. Well, neither one of us had ever seen $500. And but asked Porter, said, Porter, we need some money. He says, how much you need? I said, we need $500. He says, well, I don't have it with me now. He says, can I bring it tomorrow? I said, that's fine. So Porter brought and handed us over $500. He never says, what are you going to do with it? When you going to pay it back? Do I get any interest or anything? I thought if a guy turned loose of something like that back then, $500 was a lot of money. He turned out to be a good friend, and even after he moved to Nashville, well, we stayed in touch. And if I wanted to go to the Opry, call Porter. He'd clear me through the parking lot, get a special parking place, go in the back door. If you go in the back door there at the Opry House, you end up on the stage. And that's where we was. There was chairs there. We'd take people with us. We wanted to go to the Opry. And Porter was really a good friend of mine. Yes.
How many times did you play the Opry?
Did I what?
Did you play the Opry?
You played the
I never played the Opry. No, I never did play the Opry. It never did appeal to me to go down there and to play the Opry. I'd go down there, you know, to visit people, but no, I never played the Opry. We had the majority of the Opry people to come up and be guests on the Jubilee, so I did get to work with all of them, but no, I didn't play. Yes?
Did you work with Brenda Lee?
Oh, yeah, I love Brenda Lee. Brenda Lee, when she first came to Springfield, the first time we saw her, she was just 9 years old. But I think when they made the deal to put her on the Jubilee as regular, close to 11, I think, at that time. But I never worked with anyone that was any easier to work with or had the perfect pitch that she had. I'll tell you a little story about, we was doing a program at KY3 one time, and Brenda Lee was singing, and of course we'd rehearsed everything, and when it come time to her to sing, it was right after a commercial. So we wrote for a commercial, and of course we was talking, visiting, all that, and of course the light come on for the camera, and we were still busy talking. So Brenda just picked up the key that we had rehearsed in and started singing. And I thought, man, this kid has really got talent, and she did have. But she had, I hear the story about, of course they started booking her on the big network programs, the talk shows and all of that. And she memorized everybody's part during rehearsal. And the second time around for rehearsal, if the story I hear that if someone starts stuttering on her part, Brenda Lee would cue them in, what they're supposed to say. She had a lot of talent. Yeah. Anyway, yes.
What's your best Red Foley story?
Well, the Red Foley was one of the easiest people to work with that I ever worked. He enjoyed being part of the sideman. I was strictly a sideman. I was never a star. I was a sideman. But Red Foley enjoyed that part of it. Of course, everybody knows that around this area that Red Foley also had a drinking problem. And I spent quite a bit of time at Foley's house with him and his wife until he was drinking. When he's drinking, he didn't even want me around anywhere because he knew that that I had never taken a drink, you know, but he was real easy to work with, enjoyed being around him. And, but one of the stories I heard about the night that Red Foley died in Indiana, that he was on a program with and Billy Walker that also had worked here. And Billy Walker went to Red Foley's room that night, and they had prayer together. And the story goes that Red Foley accepted the Lord just before he died that night.
Well, tell them about Red being a son.
Who?
Tell them about when Red told you that you were pretty good and you told him he'd be terrible
Well, me and Foley, we had these little nicks at each other, you know, because he loved to be picked at and he liked to pick at you. And one of the stories, we played one of these all-night gospels things down in, I believe it's Pensacola, Florida. And they accepted us. I mean, just Foley had to go out and make bows, and he'd come back. He says, Doc, said, man, they like us here tonight, don't they? I said, yeah, they do, Red. You really done a good job. But I said, you'd sound like hell out there by yourself. My wife said, no, she says, now when you get, says, keep your eye on me. Says, because if you get talking too much, I'll do this. Have we done this yet? Okay, it's time to quit.
We sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Another, something else. I had a birthday 2 weeks ago. I'm 95 years old.